Hey guys, Dr. Keen, and we're going to move into part three of blood. And actually, we're going to talk about part three and part four today because they're both really short. And I'm going to be able to go through them with you here in the next 15 minutes. So, this week we'll cover parts three and four, and then next week we'll cover part five, and that'll be it for blood. And that'll actually wrap up um, all of our online lessons. So, here's part three right here. We talked about red blood cells already. We talked about white blood cells and all the different parts of that. And the third type of cell in blood is platelets or thrombocytes. Remember? So thrombo means clot, and that's exactly what platelets do. They cause clots, and they're fragments of this multinucleated cell called a megakaryocyte. And what that does is it basically creates all kinds of little pieces of like a sticky residue that causes things to stick to each other and to seal things up, kind of like a glue or like a cap or a plug for a wound. So we're gonna look at how it works, but this is what they look like. They actually have these kind of like arms coming off of them that are great for their function because they can actually grab hold of the tissue around them and also grab hold of each other and bring each other together to create a clot and to stop bleeding when it's necessary. Um, Hematopoiesis, we've used this word before, and we used it when we talked about the skeletal system. Remember hematopoiesis? Poiesis means like production of something. Hemato means blood. So blood cell formation, remember again, occurs in the skeletal system, in the bones, and actually in the red bone marrow of bones. The most common places you see that are in flat bones like the skull and the pelvis and the sternum, and then also in your ribs and the proximal epiphysis of the humerus and femur, which you should recognize from when we talked about the skeletal system. So remember, proximal is towards the origin, so up towards your hip and up towards your shoulder is where you're getting blood production. Those cells are created and they're put right into the bloodstream. So this system is really cool because it has a starting point of these cells called hemocytoblasts, and these hemocytoblasts are basically they're stem cells. And I know you guys have all heard of stem cells. It's kind of a hot topic in healthcare, but what stem cells are basically brand new baby cells, and they haven't become anything yet. So that's why they use stem cells in research, because they can kind of try and make them into a certain type of cell if they can. They can kind of like coerce them into a certain type of cell if possible. But your blood cells are the same way. They are created as a hemocytoblast, which is a stem cell, and then that hemocytoblast is designated into a certain type of cell. It either becomes a red blood cell, a white blood cell. If it's a white blood cell, it might be a basophil, it might be a neutrophil, it might be a T cell, or all different kinds of white blood cells, remember. And then, or it could be a thrombocyte or a platelet. So it goes through that process and it becomes what it's going to become. With red blood cells, as they are formed, they are anucleated, which means they don't have a nucleus, but remember they do have hemoglobin and they do carry oxygen. And so, but the thing about them is they only live for about 100 to 120 days, so about 3 to 4 months they're living. And once they've reached their maximum time, then they die, or they're broken down and they are taken to the liver, spleen, and other body tissues to be broken down and released, and then the hemoglobin from those cells is actually reused. So that whole process happens just like this. So you got a developing red blood cell, divides many times, and then it begins to synthesize hemoglobin. Remember, that's the oxygen carrying substance, also carries iron through your body, and then it starts to develop to the point where it can be released, and then it's an erythrocyte, and that whole process takes about 3 to 5 days, and then remember it lives for about 100 to 120 days. Erythropoietin is the production of the red blood cell, and we talked about this I think in the endocrine system last chapter when we talked about the kidneys and the adrenal glands and stuff, that erythropoietin actually takes place in the kidneys. So the kidneys are not only important for filtration and for urination and that kind of stuff, but they're also a big part of your red blood cell production. So your kidneys are very important for your oxygen levels in your body. A decline in oxygen causes the kidneys to start producing more of this erythropoietin, and if there's too much, then it will not produce as much. And remember, that's that negative feedback system that we talked about in the endocrine system. But you can have too much oxygen in your body, and it can be toxic if you have too much oxygen. That's why people talk about antioxidants a lot, like the foods that you can eat that are antioxidants, like coffee and dark chocolate and berries and stuff like that that are antioxidants. Those are good because they help prevent you from producing too much oxygen in your body, which can be detrimental to your health. So your kidneys are a big part of making that happen. Formation of leukocytes and thrombocytes or platelets. Leukocytes are stimulated by two hormones, the colony stimulating factors and interleukins, and those hormones basically create that production of the white blood cells. And then thrombopoietin is what produces platelets or thrombocytes. So thrombopoietin, remember poietin is production, thrombo, so there you go. That's pretty simple to remember. And that is all of part 3. So I told you part 3 and part 4 are pretty short here, so we're going to look at part 4 here together as well. Let me pull it up here for you so you can see it, and we will go through it together. This part is really interesting because it's going to talk about how those clots are formed. And I've told you so many times, your body is more intelligent than you will ever be. Your body is a very intricate system that works well and does so many things without you having to think about it. As long as you take care of it, it'll do these things for you. Just make sure that you're taking care of it and making those lifestyle choices to make sure that these processes can work the way they're supposed to. The first thing we're going to talk about is hemostasis. Now, this is not homeostasis. Don't get this confused. It is not homeostasis. This is hemostasis. Hemostasis is a different word. Remember, hemo means blood. Stasis means to stop or to block or to prevent from happening. So it's a stoppage of blood flow. Why would you want to have that? Well, there's some situations where you would want to have that happen. And we're going to look at them here right now. So hemostasis occurs when you have damage to a vessel and damage to your skin. You need that because you want to be able to repair that area before either something from the external environment gets in your body or you lose too much of your blood. So there's a process that occurs in hemostasis to get that whole clot set up so that you won't lose too much blood or you won't get something in your body that's not supposed to be there. So it's a 3-step process of platelet plug formation. So when you get a damaged vessel or you damage your skin in some way, you get a cut, immediately your body starts to send platelets to that area. And then you start to develop vascular spasms. Vascular spasms are an important part of this because it actually cuts off the blood supply and prevents blood flow through there too much so that you don't lose too much blood. And then coagulation is that blood clotting. We're going to look at it more specifically here. So platelet plug formation. I told you earlier, these platelets, they have these kind of like arms coming off of them, and they can attach to the tissue, they can attach to each other, and they have this kind of like sticky material to them that causes them to stick to tissue and stick to each other, and so they can create this platelet plug. So it's plugging up this hole and preventing blood from coming out and preventing stuff from getting in that's not supposed to be in there. So that's the first part of it. Vascular spasm. This is a very important part of the whole process too, because like I said, you don't want to lose too much blood. So basically, like, creates its own little tourniquet type system here, and your body does this on its own. The vessel actually constricts, and it prevents too much blood from getting there, so that you don't lose too much blood, and also you don't have too much blood there to allow foreign substances to get into it. And serotonin is actually the hormone that makes this happen. So it's just waiting for that clot to start forming before it starts to release the blood a little more. So number 3, coagulation event occurs. So in a coagulation event, what a coagulation event is it's basically just forming a clot. So you had those thrombocytes come in and create a plug, then you had the vascular constriction, and now you have the actual clot or scab starting to form. And you have a lot of different chemicals and substances that are a part in this. So you get injured tissue that releases what's called thromboplastin. Thromboplastin has a large role in clotting. Then you have phospholipids on the surfaces of platelets, and those interact with each other, triggering the clotting cascade, which is the thromboplastin and other clotting factors. And you have calcium that also plays a part. So you have all that going on in here. And then prothrombin activator converts prothrombin to thrombin, which is an enzyme. That thrombin enzyme will start to join with fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is it's a protein that basically is kind of like a long hair-like substance that starts to create this mesh-like material that will actually block the open wound and prevent blood from coming out and stuff to go in, and that's what's starting to create that scab that you get when you get a cut. And then within the hour, the clot begins to retract and kind of pull up into the skin and get that skin to become kind of pulling those two ends of the skin back towards each other, and then it allows the vessel to relax and blood to flow through it again. It's normally within 3 to 6 minutes this whole process is happening. And when you get a cut, your body's like, all right, we got to stop this right now. It gets over there and it has this whole process go through. Once the clotting cascade starts, it triggers factors quickly, and then you got this clot being formed. Gauze is really good because it's already got this kind of like lattice or this mesh type material to it, which is similar to a clot that you make, and so it creates this this area for platelets to grab hold of, and that's why putting gauze on an open cut is a good practice. 2 major disorders of hemostasis. So you can have abnormal hemostasis as well, undesirable clot formation and bleeding disorders. Undesirable clot formations, these happen for a lot of different reasons. If you have damage to the walls of a vessel, then the wall of the vessel is going to create a clot inside your vessel, and that can form what's called a thrombus, which is basically like a big plug inside your vessel, and it can block blood flow through your vessel. If it gets big enough, it can block blood flow completely, which can sometimes lead to heart attacks if it's in the right place. An embolus is when part of that clot kind of breaks off and flows through the vessel. That happens sometimes when people have this. It's not always a bad problem, but if it gets to a place where that clot is bigger than the vessel it needs to flow through, then it can cause a big problem. So clotting can occur from, like I said, roughening of the endothelium of the vessel, and that can happen from damage to it for some reason, or if you have a lot of fatty material in your vessel, then that can occur, and that comes from your diet and your lifestyle. So make sure you're making the right lifestyle choices. Undesirable clotting of immobilized patients. This is why you have to move patients around and make sure that their vessels are working and flowing freely. If you take a long trip, you should get up and move, make sure your vessels are flowing freely. And there are some anticoagulants that you can take to help blood flow improve on people too. Aspirin, heparin, dicurol, those are all for that. So, and that is part 3 and 4 of the blood.